Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to stream level 1 future options using the Trader API. Now to get started, I'm going to be using 3 scripts. The first one that's on your screen is basically the Trader API package that I have coded out. But as long as you have some sort of script that enables you to refresh your tokens and make the appropriate request, you can use that file instead. But here I have gathered all the required packages. We assign our app key and our secret token as well in lines 4 and 5. And what we need from here is to make a request using the get user preference. Now we have no parameters here. All we're doing is sending a get request using this URL and passing in our current bearer token and returning the information regarding the streamer via this request. So we get all of our accounts, the streamer information and offers, which basically is what we need to run the streamer. This is all we need from this script, which we will be using in the second one. So as you can see, I have sourced my functions from this previous file, which allows me to use this get user preference function. And it has all the streamer info, which will get passed along in order for us to log in, log out, and make any sort of request via this API. Now to log in and log out, we need to build some JSON blocks that we need to send in this third script. And in order for us to log in, we need to pass in a request ID, which is just a random number. The service will be admin, the command will be login. For the customer ID and the Coral ID, we're going to use the streamer info to pass in those IDs. For the authorization, we need to pass in our current bearer token, and for the client channel and the function ID, that gets grabbed from the streamer info as well. Now, very similarly to log out, all we are changing is the command to log out, and to log out, we don't need to send any parameters, so that's all that changes there. Now, I'm going to show you 3 functions I have created to use this streamer. The first function we need is to build our future option symbol. Now, what you need to pass in this function is the root symbol for the futures contracts. So for example, ES or MNQ, the abbreviated month, for example, January, February, and March, using 3 characters, the year abbreviation. So for example, 2025 options would just be 25, the option type, whether it's a call or a put. So you need to insert call, put, or both. And then the strike price or the strike prices. So if you just want one strike, just pass that in. Or if you want to pass in a vector of multiple, you will need to do that as a numeric vector. So in lines 436 and 437, I created some examples there. So let's go ahead and open up this function. The first thing we're going to do is replace the month abbreviations to the correct futures code. Now, if we just want calls, we need to add a dot / and then the symbol, the monthly code, the year abbreviation, a C for call, and then the strike price. And on the put side, all we're replacing is the C for a P. But if the user wants to return both, we're going to first create the calls and then the puts, and we're just going to return both the vectors and return those symbols. Now, the documentation didn't really specify on how to request weeklies, but as long as you're able to figure out the correct scheme or format, the API will return options for those futures contracts. For example, I was able to figure out the weeklies on the ES. So as long as you're entering the correct chain, as you will see in the next script, we are able to return options data. Now, if you take a look at the calendar for ES, all of them start with /E. Next, you'll see a number, and that number pertains to the day of the week. So for example, in this case, U1 is the first Monday. On the 12th, we have a 2 since that's the second Monday. And lastly, on the 19th, we have a 3 for the third Monday, which Mondays, I guess, are represented by A, Tuesdays are Bs, Wednesdays are Cs, Thursdays are Ds. Friday options are a little bit different, which instead have week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, except for the end of the month if it falls on a Friday, which have a special case. So make sure you look that up. Next, you'll see a K, and that's just for the month. And then lastly, the 2-digit year. So as long as you have that information for the option chain you want to request data for, you can pass that in into the third script. But continuing on, this first function will just return the option chain code for the monthlies, which gets passed into the second one. And in this one is where we actually build the JSON block, which we're going to be sending via the streamer. So if the user enters more than one symbol, we need to create one vector separated by commas. Otherwise, just return that one symbol. And in the JSON block, we need to pass in the request ID, the service, which is level 1 futures options. The command gets passed in, so we can subscribe, unsubscribe, add, or view. The customer ID and the Coral ID can be found in the streamer info. We're just going to pass that information along. And for the parameters, we're going to pass in all of the symbols that we want. And for the fields, by default, we're going to use all 32. And what I mean by the 32 is if we take a look at the documentation, it's the information that we get back from the API. So we want to return all the information, which is the symbol, the bid price, ask price, and so on, all the way to 31. Now, by using the streamer service, it does return each and every change in one of those. So again, if you don't need all of the fields, just make sure you replace them in here. So again, this will build the JSON block that gets sent. And what's going to end up happening is that once we receive the messages back from the streamer, we're going to dump them into a folder. And we need to have some sort of function that will read them back in and format them, which is where our last function comes in. So again, no parameters. We're just going to be reading all the files from the streamer, and we're going to pass them into this lapply. So for each of the files that gets sent into that folder, we're going to read them in. And if that message has data in there, we're going to reformat it. And the first thing that I wanted to do was reformat the column names to something more useful. So for all the 32 fields that I just showed you, we're going to format them into the correct naming convention, which takes up the majority of this function. But if we scroll all the way down, if the message doesn't have any data, we're just going to remove the file and return null. Otherwise, just row bind all the results and return that as a data frame. So by removing the files that don't have data, this will speed up the process since we have to read all the files in. And that's all you need to run the streamer service. So if we go to our last script here, we're going to source all of our functions from the previous script. Next, we're going to create a folder, if it doesn't exist, named level 1 future options dump, where all the messages will get stored into. And this is in your working directory. So it'll go ahead and create a folder if it doesn't already exist. Next, we're going to set up our WebSocket and pass in the URL for the streamer, which again is found in the streamer info. Now in line 12 is where we actually set up what happens every time we get a message from the streamer. So as you can see, we're just going to be saving these as an RDS file into our level 1 futures options folder, making sure that we have a unique number or something that differentiates each of the files, or else they'll get overwritten. So I'm just using the current timestamp. Next, we need to build our login and logout blocks. So what happens when the streamer opens, we want to send our login information, and on close, we want to make sure we log out. And again, the login and logouts are found in the previous script. Now we can go ahead and build our option symbols. So as you can see, I've selected a sequence between 5500 to 5700, spaced out in $5 intervals, which gets passed into the next function to build our option symbols. So again, we have ES, and I want the June contracts for 2025, and I want both the calls and the puts. And again, just passing in all the strikes there. We're going to pass that into our next function to build our JSON block, and we want to make sure that we subscribe. So I want to receive data for all of these strikes. Now you can be more specific. Here I just guessed the contracts. So some of these don't actually exist, but the neat part is that we won't get an error. What's cool about it is that the streamer actually returns data for the ones that are available. So if you want to get more specific, just make sure you look up the option chain on Thinkorswim and enter the appropriate strikes. After we have our JSON block, we're just going to wait and see what the status is for the streamer. If it's a 1, that means it's ready and it's running. We're going to go ahead and send our JSON block. As I mentioned before, you can request weeklies. You just need to have the correct symbol. So for this one, it looks like this one already expired because it's the second Monday. So we'll just change it to the 3rd. We want to request the 5650 put that expires the 3rd Monday in May. And then we change the command to add. We can go ahead and add that additionally to the ones we requested prior. So we'll see what happens once we run this. Now, it is after hours, so we're not going to get a continuous flow of information since markets have already closed, and I'm recording this on a Friday night. But I believe it will return some data for the last available record for each of these options. Now, to get this running, I'm just going to go ahead and run everything up to line 50. And once we click on run, it's going to create a folder in your working directory if you don't already have it. Now we're going to go ahead and add the subscription for this weekly. So I'm going to run lines 54 and 55. Now, if we check that folder, you're going to have a couple of messages coming in. So let's go ahead and read the messages back into RStudio. And we're going to use that third function that we had created in the previous script. So we're going to go ahead and run line 60. And if we take a look at our folder here, it deleted all the files that didn't have any data. Let's go ahead and take a look at all data. So it looks like we were able to retrieve 18 strikes for the monthly contracts, and this last row is the weekly contract, so we were able to successfully request it. So the table is quite lengthy. We have 34 columns, and for each of the messages we get back from the streamer, it'll show you each and every change in the bid, in the ask, in the last price, the bid size. So every little change that you see in any of the columns, it'll go ahead and return data for it. So if you run it throughout the trading session, the list can get quite lengthy. So you can continuously use this function function to retrieve all the data from our level 1 folder. So if we just want to isolate that weekly, we can just run line 65 and check sub data. So if we go to sub data, again, we only have one row for it. And from there, it's really up to you what you do with the data. But from line 67 all the way to 81, we can plot the price for the contract isolated in line 65. So we're just going to grab the bid, the ask, the last price, and the quote time, convert that into an XTS object, and go ahead and plot it. But I'm not going to do so since we only have one data point. And now to actually close the streamer, we go to the next section, and all we need to do is just run line 87, and that will actually close it out. So I'm going to go ahead and run these lines of code. And after you do so, you'll stop receiving messages from the streamer, but you'll still have access to the data that you saved up to that point in time. Well guys, that's pretty much it for running level 1 options on futures. I'll go ahead and leave a link down in the description area to my Patreon where you can find these scripts. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.